Rome, 146 BC. You stand in what was once the greatest trading city in the Mediterranean, watching Roman soldiers methodically slaughter every man, woman, and child they can find. This is Carthage, and what you are witnessing is not merely a military conquest. It is the systematic extermination of an entire civilization. But wait, hear what happens next. Because what I've just described is only the opening act of a reign of terror that would last for centuries. The Roman Empire, which left us roads, aqueducts, and legal systems, was simultaneously perfecting the art of systematic mass murder, a scale not surpassed until the 20th century. You think you know Roman history. Do you think the empire that gave us gladiator movies and epics was somehow more civilized than other ancient powers? The truth I'm about to reveal will shatter every romanticized notion you have about Roman civilization. Behind the marble columns and triumphal parades lies a legacy of systematic atrocity, so calculated, so deliberately brutal, that medieval warfare seems merciful by comparison. Today, we will explore the 8 most egregious war crimes committed by the Roman Empire. These were not isolated incidents, nor the acts of rogue commanders. These were systematic atrocities ordered by the highest Roman government, celebrated in Roman streets, and proudly recorded by Roman historians for posterity. But the most shocking part, every single atrocity was considered perfectly legal under Roman law. In fact, they were celebrated as evidence of Rome's superiority and moral authority over the barbarian world. If you're ready to uncover the dark truth about Roman civilization that history textbooks desperately try to hide, please subscribe and like. In the comments, tell me where you're from. Before we delve into these specific atrocities, you need to understand an unsettling fact: Roman warfare wasn't just about winning battles. It was about creating a machine of systematic terror, so efficient, so psychologically devastating, that entire populations would surrender rather than face what Rome could unleash. Rome did not stumble into brutality. They weaponized terror itself, developing a military doctrine that explicitly endorsed the principle: let them hate, so long as they fear. This wasn't just a motto, it was official state policy enacted through systematic campaigns of terror, designed to make resistance psychologically impossible. Consider this: Roman engineers, the brilliant minds who built the Pantheon and the Colosseum, spent equal time designing siege engines specifically intended to maximize civilian suffering during military operations. They understood that prolonged sieges created famine, disease, and despair, a terror that lingered long after surrender. Roman law provided a detailed legal framework for systematic violence that would make a modern war crimes tribunal physically ill. Concepts like enemy of all mankind. He allowed Roman commanders to commit any atrocity against designated enemies while claiming legal and moral authority. But the truly frightening part, the Romans documented their atrocities in detail because they were proud of them. These were not shameful secrets hidden from history. They were celebrated accomplishments that commanders used to advance political careers. The more brutal the conquest, the more lavish the triumph granted by the Senate. The scale of Roman systematic violence is beyond modern comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest Roman military operations caused the deaths of over 15 million civilians during the Republican early empire alone. This constitutes one of the largest programs of systematic extermination in ancient history, executed by a civilization that claimed to bring peace and order to the world. Now, let me show you exactly how this terror machine operated, starting with what may be the most systematic act of cultural destruction in ancient history. 1. The destruction of Carthage, 146 BC. This was not war. This was systematic extermination, designed to erase an entire civilization from existence. And the most chilling part, this was not killing in the heat of battle or military necessity. This was calculated annihilation ordered by the Roman Senate and executed with the precision of a modern industrial operation. The Third Punic War was essentially a manufactured conflict. By 149 BC, Carthage posed no military threat to Rome. The city had been stripped of its navy, forbidden from maintaining a significant army, and forced to pay massive tribute for decades. So, why did Rome decide to destroy it utterly? Senator Marcus Porcius Cato made the reason perfectly clear. He ended every speech in the Senate with these words: Carthagod illenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Not defeated, not conquered. Destroyed. Because as long as Carthaginian civilization existed, it represented an alternative to Roman values, Roman culture, Roman hegemony. Imagine being a Carthaginian civilian during the 3-year siege of Carthage. You were trapped inside the walls with over 500,000 others as the Roman army under Scipio Aemilia and US systematically starves you into submission. Food runs out, water sources become contaminated with disease, bodies pile up in the streets, and plague spreads through the crowded city. The siege is just psychological preparation for what Roman engineers had already planned. When the Roman army finally breaches the walls in the spring of 146 BC, they unleash what can only be described as systematic, industrialized murder. Scipio issued clear orders. No Carthaginian was to be spared except those specifically designated for slavery. Roman soldiers advanced systematically through Carthage, street by street, house by house, executing everyone they encountered. The historian Polybius, who witnessed the destruction, described Roman legionaries dragging families from their homes and slaughtering them in the streets. Children were killed before their parents. The elderly were eaten to death. Pregnant women were gutted, and unborn infants were killed. This was not random violence driven by battlefield rage. This was organized extermination executed with military precision. The systematic nature of the slaughter is revealed in Roman military records that treated human beings as inventory to be cleared. Scipio's engineers had divided the city into sectors, designating specific legions to clear the inhabitants from each area. Roman quartermasters calculated the logistics of corpse disposal with the same efficiency they managed supplies of grain. The killing went on for 6 days and 6 nights without pause. Roman sources described streets running with blood, the stench of decaying bodies so strong soldiers had to cover their faces with cloth. The estimated death toll exceeds 400,000 men, women, and children systematically massacred by the Roman army. But this reveals the truly systematic nature of Roman atrocities. Scipio's handling of Carthage wasn't finished. After the massacre, the Roman army spent an additional 11 days systematically destroying every building in the city. This was not random wreckage but calculated total erasure, designed to ensure no trace of Carthaginian civilization would remain. Roman engineers used specialized demolition techniques to destroy structures with mathematical precision. Libraries containing centuries of Carthaginian literature were burned. Temples were dismantled stone by stone. Artistic treasures were either looted for transport to Rome or smashed beyond recognition. The systematic destruction was so complete that modern archaeologists struggle to find traces of the original Carthaginian city. The approximately 50,000 Carthaginians who survived the massacre faced a fate perhaps worse than death. They were immediately enslaved, sold throughout the Mediterranean. But this was not ordinary slavery. Roman law specifically designated these survivors as diedodicii, people with no legal rights whatsoever, whom masters could kill without legal consequence. According to the historian Appian, the Roman army then performed a ritual curse on the site of Carthage. While the famous story of salting the earth is likely myth, Roman religious authorities did conduct ceremonies designed to ensure the location would remain desolate and uninhabitable. This was spiritual as well as material annihilation. But the story becomes even more disturbing when you realize the coordinated nature of this systematic destruction. In the very same year Carthage burned, Roman armies under Lucius Mummius carried out similarly systematic destruction of Corinth, one of Greece's greatest cities. This double destruction in 146 BC was no coincidence. It was coordinated, systematic annihilation, designed to send a clear message Roman power was absolute, and resistance meant complete obliteration. To the destruction of Corinth 146 BC. That the destruction of Corinth is more chilling than that of Carthage. The Romans had learned from their earlier massacre and refined their techniques of systematic cultural destruction with clinical efficiency for maximum psychological impact. Corinth was no ordinary Greek city. It was the leader of the Achaean League, the last significant force of Greek resistance to Roman rule. The city controlled crucial trade routes between the Aegean and Ionian seas and was one of the wealthiest, most culturally sophisticated cities in the Mediterranean. It represented everything Greek civilization had achieved in art, philosophy, and commerce. Rome's decision to destroy Corinth wasn't about military necessity but a calculated understanding. Eliminating the cultural and economic heart of Greek resistance would forever crush the spirit of Greek independence. This was only psychological warfare on a civilization scale. Imagine being a Corinthian citizen watching Roman legions approach your walls. You know what happened to Carthage just months earlier. Do you understand that surrender won't save you because the Romans aren't interested in conquest? They want extermination as a lesson to the world. When Roman armies breach Corinth's defenses, they implement systematic massacre techniques, perfected at Carthage but adjusted for maximum cultural impact. Every adult male in the city is systematically executed, regardless of whether they participated in the resistance. Roman military records describe this as cleansing the city of potential leaders who might inspire future Greek resistance. The fate of Corinth's women and children reveals the sophisticated cruelty of Roman systematic violence. They were not simply executed but designated for enslavement and sexual exploitation designed to destroy Greek cultural identity. Roman soldiers were permitted to claim any woman or child as personal property, resulting in weeks of systematic rape and abuse. The historian Pausanias provides horrific details of what happened to Corinthian families during the Roman occupation. Children were systematically separated from their mothers and sold to different masters to prevent family bonds from surviving. Women were systematically abused by multiple soldiers before being shipped to slave markets across the Roman Empire. Their Greek identities deliberately erased. That the destruction of Corinth's population was just the beginning of Rome's systematic cultural war. Memmius ordered the complete destruction of the city's cultural heritage, which represented centuries of Greek artistic and intellectual achievement. Roman armies systematically looted Corinth's artistic treasures with the efficiency of modern art thieves, shipping the most valuable pieces to Rome, while destroying those too large or fragile to transport. The historian Pliny the Elder describes Roman soldiers using priceless Greek paintings as gaming boards and smashing ancient statues for sport. The destruction of the Corinthian library was particularly systematic and devastating. Greek manuscripts containing philosophical, mathematical, and literary works accumulated over centuries were burned in a fire that lasted for days. This represented deliberate destruction of intellectual heritage, designed to eliminate Greek cultural superiority. After looting everything of value, Roman engineers spent weeks systematically demolishing every building in Corinth, with techniques that ensured the city could never be rebuilt as a center of Greek culture and resistance. This wasn't random destruction but calculated total erasure, designed to wipe Greek civilization from the Mediterranean. The systematic nature of Corinth's destruction is revealed in Roman military records describing it as an engineering project with specific objectives and timelines. Buildings were collapsed in predetermined sequences to maximize destruction while minimizing danger to Roman troops. Roman religious authorities then performed ceremonies declaring the site of Corinth cursed and unfit for habitation. This spiritual dimension of destruction was designed to prevent any future attempt to rebuild the city and restore Greek cultural independence. The psychological impact of Corinth's destruction was immediate and profound. Either Greek cities that had considered joining the Achaean League quickly submitted to Roman authority to avoid similar annihilation. The fact that Carthage and Corinth were systematically eliminated in the same year proved Roman power was absolute and resistance futile. But if you think the Romans had finished perfecting their techniques of systematic mass murder, you're mistaken. Because what Julius Caesar did in Gaul makes Carthage and Corinth look like military exercises. 3 Caesar's War of Extermination in Gaul 5850 BC. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul represents the most systematic campaign of extermination in ancient history. And the shocking part, Caesar himself boasted in his own writings that he killed over 1 million Gauls and enslaved another million. He was proud of this systematic mass murder and used it to advance his political career in Rome. But this was not an accidental byproduct of military campaigning. Caesar's Gallic War was deliberately designed as a war of extermination, planned and executed with a systematic efficiency that would later be seen in 20th century industrialized killing. Caesar's campaigns weren't defensive conflicts, but deliberate wars of aggression, designed to provide the wealth, slaves, and military glory needed for his political ambitions. Systematic violence against the Gallic people wasn't a byproduct of achieving these goals, it was central to them. Consider this: Caesar developed systematic techniques for eliminating entire tribes that were so efficient they became models for Roman military operations. He turned mass murder into a science. The scale of Caesar's systematic violence is revealed in his own proud documentation of entire peoples being exterminated. The Helvetii, who attempted to migrate across Roman territory, were systematically hunted down and massacred. The approximately 368,000 Helvetii who began the migration, only 110,000 survived to be returned to their homeland as slaves. Caesar's treatment of the Eber One's tribe demonstrates the systematic nature of his extermination campaigns. After their leader Ambiorix defeated a Roman legion, Caesar declared, "The entire tribe must be eliminated." Roman armies spent months systematically hunting down every Eber One's man, woman, and child, continuing the slaughter even after organized resistance had ended. Imagine being a Gallic warrior defending your village against Caesar's legions. You know surrender means enslavement for your family and execution for yourself. But you also know resistance means systematic extermination of everyone you know. Caesar had made it clear he would eliminate entire tribes to prevent future resistance. The siege of Avaricum in 52 BC provides one of the best documented examples of Caesar's systematic cruelty, revealing the calculated nature of his mass killing techniques. When Roman armies began their siege, the Gallic stronghold contained approximately 40,000 people. Caesar refused offers of surrender, declaring that the city must serve as an example to terrorize other Gallic communities. When Roman armies finally breached Avaricum's walls, Caesar ordered the systematic execution of everyone in the city using techniques designed for maximum terror impact. Roman soldiers spent 3 days methodically executing the inhabitants, including children and the elderly who posed no military threat. The systematic nature of this massacre is revealed in Roman records describing the careful organization required to efficiently execute 40,000 people. Only 800 of the original 40,000 survived, and these survivors were deliberately allowed to escape to spread accounts of Roman brutality to other Gallic communities. This was psychological warfare designed to crush Gallic resistance through systematic terror. Caesar's systematic violence extended beyond battlefield casualties to include deliberate targeting of Gallic culture and society. Roman armies systematically destroyed Gallic temples, burned repositories of oral tradition, and executed druids who preserved Gallic religious and cultural knowledge. Caesar's slave raiding represents another dimension of his systematic violence against the Gallic people, revealing the industrial scale of Roman human trafficking. Roman armies would systematically capture entire communities, break up families, and ship survivors to slave markets throughout the Mediterranean. These raids continued even in areas that had submitted to Roman authority, terrorizing supposedly pacified populations. The systematic nature of Caesar's violence is revealed in Roman military logistics records that treated human beings as resources to be harvested with the same efficiency as grain or livestock. Caesar's quartermasters calculated how many slaves each campaign could capture and planned transportation accordingly. Human trafficking was integrated into Roman military planning as a standard revenue source. Caesar's treatment of prisoners of war violated even Roman standards of conduct, revealing his deliberate use of systematic brutality for psychological warfare. Rather than ransoming captured warriors as tradition dictated, he systematically executed prisoners to terrorize enemy populations. The historian Suetonius describes Caesar ordering the hands of captured Gallic warriors to be cut off before their execution. The psychological warfare aspects of Caesar's campaigns were equally systematic and sophisticated. Roman armies would deliberately leave survivors of massacres to flee to other Gallic communities, spreading accounts of Roman atrocities. This created terror that often leads cities to surrender without fighting to avoid systematic extermination. Modern demographic studies estimate Caesar's campaigns reduced the Gallic population by approximately 30% through direct killing, enslavement, and displacement. This represents one of the most dramatic population reductions in ancient history, caused by systematic violence. But what's more disturbing, Caesar used his success in Gaul to justify crossing the Rubicon and plunging Rome into civil war, bringing his techniques of systematic violence back to the heart of the empire. For the second cultural destruction of Alexandria 30 BC. In 30 BC, the ancient world lost something that could never be replaced. When Roman armies under Augustus Octavian took Alexandria during the final civil war against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they didn't merely conquer a city. They systematically destroyed the greatest center of scholarship and culture in the ancient world. But what makes the sack of Alexandria particularly devastating? This wasn't just a military conquest. It was the deliberate destruction of centuries of accumulated human knowledge and cultural achievement, carried out by Romans who understood exactly what they were destroying. Alexandria wasn't just Egypt's capital. It was the intellectual capital of the ancient world, home to the greatest library ever assembled and a museum that attracted scholars from across the Mediterranean. For more than 3 centuries, Alexandria had been the center of scientific research, mathematical discovery, and literary achievement. The Great Library of Alexandria contained an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls representing the accumulated knowledge of ancient civilizations. The works of Archimedes, Euclid, Eratosthenes, and countless other scholars, whose discoveries form the foundation of human scientific knowledge, were housed in this single institution. Imagine being a scholar in Alexandria watching Roman legions approach your city. You understand, you're witnessing the end of an era. The greatest collection of human knowledge ever assembled is about to be systematically destroyed by soldiers who viewed learning as a threat to Roman authority. The siege of Alexandria was designed not merely to capture the city, but to eliminate its status as a center of intellectual resistance to Roman rule. Octavian understood that as long as Alexandria remained the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, it represented an alternative to Roman cultural hegemony. When Roman armies breached Alexandria's defenses, they carried out systematic destruction, targeting not just military objectives but the intellectual and cultural institutions that made Alexandria unique. This was cultural warfare designed to eliminate Egyptian intellectual independence. The systematic massacre of Alexandria's population proceeded with the same efficiency Romans had perfected at Carthage, Corinth, and Gaul. Tens of thousands of Alexandrians were systematically executed, including scholars, priests, and intellectuals who represented the continuity of Egyptian learning and culture. But the material destruction of human life was just the beginning of Rome's systematic cultural destruction in Alexandria. Roman armies systematically targeted the institutions that had made Alexandria the intellectual center of the ancient world. The Great Library was systematically looted and destroyed, with Roman soldiers burning scrolls for fuel and using priceless manuscripts as packing material for art treasures being shipped to Rome. Centuries of human intellectual achievement were eliminated in days by soldiers who couldn't read the text they were destroying. The systematic nature of this cultural destruction is revealed in Roman records, describing deliberate targeting of Alexandria's intellectual infrastructure. The museum was systematically dismantled, its laboratories destroyed, its scholars either killed or enslaved. This wasn't random destruction but deliberate elimination of Egyptian intellectual capacity. The destruction of Alexandria's observatory and scientific instruments represents one of the most significant losses of scientific knowledge in human history. Devices used by ancient astronomers and mathematicians for precise calculations were systematically destroyed or looted, setting back human scientific understanding by centuries. Roman armies systematically destroyed Alexandria's medical schools and libraries, eliminating one of the most advanced centers of medical knowledge in the ancient world. Surgical techniques, pharmacological knowledge, and anatomical studies developed over centuries were lost as Roman soldiers burned medical libraries. The systematical elimination of Alexandria's cultural institutions extended to its religious and philosophical schools. Roman armies deliberately targeted Egyptian temples and schools that preserved ancient wisdom traditions because they understood these institutions offered alternatives to Roman religious and philosophical authority. The forced suicides of Mark Antony and Cleopatra represented the personal dimension of Rome's systematic cultural destruction. Egypt's last pharaoh and her Roman ally weren't merely defeated, they were forced to kill themselves, symbolically ending the independence of Egyptian civilization. The transformation of Egypt into a Roman province involved systematic exploitation designed to strip the country of its wealth and cultural independence. Egyptian grain production was reorganized to feed Rome, while Egyptian cultural traditions were systematically suppressed or appropriated for Roman use. The long-term impact of Alexandria's destruction on the development of human knowledge cannot be overstated. Centuries of accumulated scientific and mathematical knowledge were lost in days in ways that affected human development for over a millennium. Modern historians regard the sack of Alexandria as one of the greatest cultural catastrophes in human history. Professor Luciano Canfora describes the destruction as systematic intellectual warfare designed to eliminate Egyptian culture as an alternative to Roman hegemony. But if you think the destruction of Alexandria was the worst thing Romans did to civilians, listen to how they responded to rebellion in Britain. 5. Suppression of Boudicca's revolt 60-61 AD. The Roman response to Boudicca's revolt demonstrates how the empire dealt with colonial rebellion through a systematic massacre designed to terrorize conquered populations into permanent submission. But what makes this atrocity particularly horrific is how Roman commanders refined their systematic violence techniques for maximum psychological impact on civilian populations. Boudicca's revolt began with systematic abuse of the Iceni tribe, including the public flogging of Queen Boudicca herself and the rape of her daughters by Roman soldiers. But the Roman response went far beyond punishing the perpetrators, to include systematic violence against anyone suspected of supporting British independence. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus conducted a systematic campaign of terror designed to permanently crush British resistance. Roman military records describe this as making an example that would prevent future rebellion by demonstrating the consequences of challenging Roman authority. But this reveals the systematic nature of Roman terror tactics. Suetonius wasn't contented with merely defeating Boudicca's army. He wanted to create such profound psychological trauma in the British population that the memory of Roman brutality would prevent resistance for generations. Imagine being a British civilian watching Roman legions approach your village. You know they've come, not to distinguish between warriors and then combatants. Roman policy declared that anyone who had supported Boudicca, including women and children, must be eliminated to prevent future resistance. The initial Roman response involved systematic destruction of British settlements suspected of supporting the rebellion. Roman armies burned entire villages, executed male inhabitants, and enslaved surviving women and children. This wasn't random retaliation but calculated terrorism designed to crush British morale. Yates employed systematic intelligence gathering to identify British communities that had provided any support to Boudicca's revolt. This information was used to plan systematic reprisal operations designed to eliminate potential future resistance leaders and terrorize the British population. When Suetonius finally faced Boudicca's army at the Battle of Watling Street, the Roman victory was followed by systematic massacre that exceeded even Roman standards of brutality. The historian Tacitus describes Roman soldiers systematically hunting down fleeing Britons, executing not just warriors, but the women and children accompanying the army. The systematic nature of Roman violence after Watling Street is revealed in Tacitus's description: fields piled with bodies. Roman armies spent days systematically killing fleeing Britons, making no distinction between combatants and civilians. The estimated death toll exceeds 80,000 British men, women, and children. But battlefield massacre was just the beginning of Roman systematic violence against the British population. Suetonius ordered systematic reprisal operations against any tribe suspected of supporting Boudicca, even those not actively involved in the rebellion. Roman armies systematically destroyed British agricultural infrastructure, burning crops and killing livestock to create famine conditions that would weaken potential future resistance. These deliberately created famine conditions affected hundreds of thousands of British civilians who had nothing to do with the rebellion. Roman systematic cultural destruction during the suppression of Boudicca's revolt included targeting British religious sites and cultural institutions. Roman armies deliberately destroyed sacred groves, executed druids, and eliminated traditional British leadership to prevent cultural survival. Roman military records describe systematic capture and enslavement of British populations. During the suppression campaign, entire communities were systematically enslaved regardless of their involvement in the rebellion, with families broken up and shipped to different regions of the Roman Empire. The psychological warfare aspects of Roman suppression tactics were equally systematic and sophisticated. German armies deliberately allowed some British survivors to escape to spread accounts of Roman atrocities through unconnected territory, creating terror that prevented future resistance movements. The scale of Roman systematic violence during the suppression of Boudicca's revolt is estimated to have reduced the British population by approximately 15% through direct killing, enslavement, and famine. This represents one of the most dramatic population reductions in British history. Suetonius's systematic campaign of terror was so extreme, it drew criticism even from Roman authorities. The historian Tacitus notes that Suetonius was eventually recalled to Rome partly because his systematic violence was creating conditions that threatened Rome's long-term control of Britain. Modern archaeological evidence reveals the extent of Roman systematic destruction during Boudicca's suppression. Excavations show many British settlements were systematically burned and abandoned during this period, with evidence of large mass graves containing civilian victims. But Roman systematic violence in Britain pales in comparison to the campaign Emperor Hadrian would later launch to permanently eliminate resistance. 6. Suppression of the Bar Kokhba Revolt 136 AD. The Roman suppression of the Bar Kokhba Revolt 136 AD represents the most systematic campaign of cultural and physical extermination in Roman history. Emperor Hadrian's response to resistance went beyond military conquest to attempt the complete erasure of identity and culture from a region. But what makes Hadrian's campaign particularly systematic and terrifying? This wasn't a response to a military threat but a deliberately planned program of extermination, designed to solve what Romans viewed as a persistent problem through systematical elimination of a people and their culture. The Bar Kokhba revolt began as a response to Hadrian's decisions to establish a Roman colony on the ruins of the ancient city and build a Roman temple on the sacred site. But Hadrian's suppression of the revolt exceeded even standard Roman systematic violence. Hadrian assigned his most experienced general, Sextus Julius Severus, to command the suppression with explicit orders to permanently eliminate resistance through systematic extermination of population and culture. Roman military records describe this as the final solution to persistent resistance in the region. Imagine being a civilian hiding in the network of caves and tunnels throughout the region as Roman armies systematically hunt down everyone suspected of supporting the rebellion. You know surrender means death because Roman policy declared that historical identity itself was treason against the empire. The Roman armies employed systematic siege tactics against fortresses, designed to maximize civilian casualties rather than achieve quick military victory. The siege of Betar, the revolt's last stronghold, lasted for months specifically to terrorize the population through systematic starvation and psychological warfare. When Roman armies captured fortresses, they implemented systematic extermination policies that exceeded Roman treatment of other rebellious populations. The historian Diocletius records that Roman armies killed over 580,000 people during the suppression campaign, approximately half the region's population. The systematic nature of Roman violence during the suppression is revealed in archaeological evidence from the cave complexes where families sought refuge. Roman armies sealed cave entrances with stones, burying civilians alive inside, creating mass graves undisturbed until modern archaeological excavations. Roman armies systematically destroyed settlements throughout the region, implementing scorched earth policies designed to make the area uninhabitable for surviving populations. Over 985 villages were systematically demolished, their populations either killed or enslaved. But Hadrian's systematic erasure went beyond material destruction to include deliberate cultural obliteration, designed to erase historical connections to the region. He renamed cities and regions to attempt to erase cultural memory and historical identity. Roman authorities systematically banned traditional religious practices throughout the empire, executed religious leaders who continued to teach traditional law, and destroyed copies of religious texts. This was cultural warfare designed to eliminate identity, even among populations who survived the physical violence. The systematic nature of Hadrian's policies included economic warfare designed to impoverish surviving communities. Property was systematically confiscated. Merchants were barred from major markets. Craftsmen were excluded from trade guilds. Roman armies systematically enslaved survivors of the revolt. But these slaves received particularly harsh treatment designed to break cultural identity. Slaves were deliberately separated from family members and forbidden from practicing their religion. The scale of systematic violence during Hadrian's suppression campaign was so extreme it depopulated large portions of the region. Archaeological evidence shows extensive areas remained uninhabited for decades after the suppression, indicating systematic demographic destruction. Hadrian's systematic erasure policies were so successful they effectively ended political independence for nearly 18 centuries. The trauma of systematic material and cultural destruction shaped identity and theology until the establishment of the modern state. Modern historians view Hadrian's suppression as an example of early systematic ethnic cleansing. Professor Peter Schaeffer describes Roman policy as a deliberate attempt to eliminate identity through a combination of physical violence and cultural destruction. But if you think systematic extermination was the worst thing Romans did to conquered populations, you haven't heard about their systematic torture and terror techniques. 7. Systematic torture and terror: crucifixion and decimation. Roman military discipline and punishment techniques represent some of the most systematic applications of terror in ancient warfare. But what makes Roman terror techniques particularly horrifying is how they were refined over centuries into precise instruments of psychological warfare designed to break human will through calculated cruelty. The practices of mass crucifixion and decimation weren't random acts of violence, but sophisticated techniques designed to maintain control through systematic cruelty that terrified both enemies and Roman soldiers alike. These were engineered systems of torture, designed for maximum psychological impact. The aftermath of the Spartacus slave revolt in 71 BC provides the best-documented example of Roman systematic crucifixion, revealing the industrial scale of Roman torture techniques. After defeating the slave army, Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. Imagine walking the Appian Way in the weeks following Spartacus's defeat. For over 100 miles, you pass crucified slaves in various stages of death and decomposition. Some are still alive, crying for water or mercy. These have been dead for days, their bodies attracting scavenger birds. This was systematic terrorism designed to ensure no slave would ever consider rebellion again. Roman crucifixion was designed not for quick execution but for maximum suffering and public display. The systematic nature of this torture technique reveals Roman understanding of how to use prolonged agony for psychological warfare. Victims typically survive for days on the cross, dying slowly from exposure, thirst, and gradual asphyxiation. The 6,000 crucifixions along the Appian Way required systematic planning and organization. that reveals the calculated nature of Roman terror. The Iran engineers had to construct thousands of crosses, organize transportation of victims, and coordinate simultaneous executions along more than 100 miles. Roman military records describe the logistics of crucifixion in meticulous detail, treating systematic torture as an engineering problem requiring careful planning and resource allocation. The ability to organize mass crucifixion became a mark of Roman administrative efficiency, not a source of shame. Decimation represents another systematic Roman era technique designed to maintain military discipline through calculated cruelty that created psychological trauma far beyond the immediate victims. When Roman units showed cowardice or mutiny, commanders would systematically execute one soldier in 10 chosen by lot to terrorize survivors into obedience. Decimation involved forcing soldiers to club their randomly selected comrades to death, creating a psychological trauma that bound surviving units together through shared guilt and terror. This wasn't random punishment but calculated psychological warfare designed to prevent future discipline problems. The systematic nature of decimation is revealed in Roman military manuals that provided detailed instructions for carrying out the procedure with maximum psychological impact. Commanders were taught how to organize the lot-minus-drawing system, how to select appropriate execution methods, and how to maximize psychological effects on surviving soldiers. Roman historical records document numerous examples of systematic decimation. Across 5 centuries of Roman military history, the practice was considered so effective for maintaining discipline that it was employed by Roman commanders from Republican times through the late Empire. The psychological impact of Roman systematic terror techniques extended far beyond immediate victims, affecting behavior throughout Roman society. The knowledge that Rome would employ systematic torture and mass execution to maintain control deterred resistance movements and rebellions for centuries. Roman systematic terror techniques were deliberately designed to be visible and memorable. Mass crucifixionists were positioned along major roads to ensure maximum public exposure. Decimation ceremonies were performed before assembled armies to maximize psychological impact on witnesses. The legal frameworks surrounding Roman systematic terror techniques provided detailed justification for extreme violence, normalizing brutality within Roman society itself. Roman law distinguished between different categories of enemies and prescribed specific torture methods for each, creating institutional knowledge about systematic cruelty. Modern historians studying Roman era techniques have identified patterns of systematic violence designed to maintain imperial control through calculated cruelty. Professor Kyle Harper describes Roman systematic violence as sophisticated state terrorism designed to deter resistance through calculated cruelty. The influence of Roman systematic terror techniques extended beyond the empire, affecting military practices throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The Roman understanding of how systematic violence could maintain political control became part of European military tradition for more than 1,000 years. But the most shocking example of Roman systematic violence comes from a betrayal so extreme it shocked even Roman society itself. The Massacre of the Lusitania NSC, 150 BC. The Massacre of the Lusitania NS represents the most systematic example of Roman betrayal and bad faith in ancient history. But what makes this atrocity particularly disturbing is how it reveals the calculated nature of Roman deception and the precise planning required to carry out mass systematic betrayal. The actions of Roman general Servius Sulpicius Galba were shocking even by Roman standards, showing how far Roman commanders would go to eliminate resistance through calculated deception designed to maximize victim vulnerability. The Lusitania NS, inhabiting modern Portugal, had conducted successful guerrilla warfare against Roman armies for years. Their knowledge of local terrain and hit-and-run tactics made them difficult to defeat through conventional military means. Alva understood that defeating the Lusitania NS required more than military force. He orchestrated a campaign of systematic deception, designed to eliminate Lusitania and resistance by betraying them into a position where their entire population could be exterminated to destroy their capacity for continued guerrilla warfare. Imagine being a Lusitania warrior who had fought Roman armies for years. Then Galba offers peace talks. You're suspicious but hopeful of finally protecting your family from Roman violence. You have no way of knowing the Roman general has planned your systematic execution down to the smallest detail. Galba's deception campaign involved systematic propaganda designed to convince Lusitania leaders that Rome genuinely sought peaceful resolution of the conflict. Roman agents spent months spreading messages that Galba was different from previous commanders and genuinely wanted to end violence through negotiation rather than conquest. The systematic nature of Galba's betrayal is revealed in Roman records describing months of meticulous preparation for the massacre while maintaining the appearance of peace negotiations. This was calculated betrayal requiring detailed planning and coordination. When Lusitania leaders agreed to peace talks, Galba demanded they lay down their weapons and allow Roman census-minus acres to register their population as a sign of good faith. This requirement was presented as standard Roman administrative procedure, necessary for establishing peaceful relations. The Lusitania weary from years of warfare and eager for peace, agreed to Galba's terms and assembled in 3 large groups at designated locations. They brought their families, laid down their weapons as requested, trusting Roman assurances of protection. Once the Lusitania were disarmed and dissembled, Galba revealed his true intentions. Roman soldiers suddenly surrounded all 3 groups and began systematic massacre of the men, women, and children who had trusted Roman promises of peace. The historian Appian provides horrific details of Galba's systematic slaughter. Making no distinction between warriors and civilians. The death toll exceeded 30,000 Lusitania who came seeking peace and found systematic betrayal and murder instead. The systematic nature of Galba's massacre is revealed in its careful organization and execution. Roman armies had clearly planned the operation in advance, with specific units designated to block escape routes and others assigned to carry out the killing. This wasn't spontaneous violence, but calculated mass murder. Galba's betrayal was so extreme it shocked Roman public opinion. The systematic betrayal of negotiated agreements violated Roman conceptions of honor and military conduct, leading to political criticism that damaged Galba's career despite his military success. The few Lusitania who survived Galba's massacre were systematically enslaved and sold throughout the Mediterranean. But the psychological impact of this systematic betrayal extended far beyond the immediate victims, affecting how other Iberian tribes viewed Roman peace offers. Modern historians regard Galba's massacre of the Lusitania as one of the most systematic examples of military betrayal in ancient history. Professor John Richardson describes the event, calculated deception designed to eliminate resistance through betrayal rather than military conquest. The systematic nature of Roman betrayal in the Lusitania incident influenced Roman military doctrine for centuries. Later commanders understood that systematic deception to be more effective than conventional warfare in eliminating resistant populations while minimizing Roman casualties. Conclusion. These 8 examples of Roman war crimes reveal an unsettling truth about what we call the foundations of Western civilization. Systematic torture, mass murder, and cultural destruction that marked Roman expansion weren't anomalies committed by a few brutal commanders. They are sophisticated techniques developed by one of history's most advanced civilizations and employed consistently for over 6 centuries. What makes these Roman atrocities particularly horrifying is how they were celebrated and institutionalized. Within Roman society, the systematic destruction of Carthage and Corinth was commemorated in triumphal processions. Caesar's extermination of Gallic tribes advanced his political career. The massacre techniques perfected at Alexandria became standard military doctrine. Roman law provided a detailed legal framework for systematic violence against designated enemies. Concepts like enemy of all mankind legitimized any atrocity against state enemies, while Roman religious authorities provided spiritual justification for systematic cultural destruction. The psychological techniques Romans developed for terrorizing populations through systematic violence influenced military strategy for thousands of years. The understanding that spectacular brutality against civilians could control entire populations became a fundamental principle of imperial administration that continued into modern times. The scale of suffering caused by Roman systematic violence is beyond comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest just the campaigns discussed in this video resulted in the systematic murder of over 8 million civilians. This represents one of the highest death tolls from systematic violence in ancient history. The Roman Empire's systematic destruction of alternative civilizations eliminated cultural diversity developed over centuries. The obliteration of Carthaginian, Greek, Gallic, and Egyptian knowledge represents one of the greatest losses of human intellectual heritage in history. The systematic deception, mass crucifixion, decimation, and cultural destruction techniques all Romans developed provided blueprints for later atrocities. The Roman understanding of how systematic violence could maintain political control influenced European military and political thought for over 15 centuries. Understanding these Roman atrocities provides crucial insight into how systematic cruelty becomes normalized within advanced civilizations. The progression from individual violence to institutional terror to cultural celebration of systematic murder reveals patterns still relevant for understanding modern conflict. The archaeological and historical evidence of these Roman war crimes also reveals how a society tries to hide or justify its systematic cruelty. The romanticized version of Roman history taught in schools deliberately obscures the systematic violence that marked Roman expansion, creating sanitized myths that ignore historical reality. Perhaps what's most disturbing about Roman systematic violence is how it was integrated into a civilization that simultaneously achieved excellence in law, engineering, and administration. The same society that built the Pantheon and developed sophisticated legal codes was systematically exterminating entire peoples and cultures. The Roman example demonstrates that technological and cultural sophistication doesn't prevent systematic cruelty but may actually enable it by providing more efficient methods to organize and implement mass violence. Roman engineering skills made possible systematic siege warfare designed to maximize civilian suffering. Roman administrative capacity enabled the organization of systematic massacre, mass enslavement, and cultural destruction on a scale less sophisticated societies couldn't achieve. The systematic nature of Roman violence was made possible by Roman civilization, and not in spite of it. If this exploration of Roman systematic violence has revealed dark truths about the foundations of Western civilization that you never learned in school, be sure to subscribe for more content exposing the brutal reality behind historical myths. In the comments below, tell me which of these 8 Roman atrocities shocked you most and what other dark chapters of ancient history you'd like to explore. These historical examples remind us that the capacity for systematic cruelty exists in all human societies, including the most advanced and sophisticated civilizations. The institutions, laws, and cultural values that prevent such atrocities require constant vigilance to maintain, because the Roman example shows how quickly systematic violence can become normalized uncelebrated. The legacy of systematic terror in the Roman Empire serves as a warning about what humans are capable of when power becomes unrestrained and societies lose fundamental human dignity in the pursuit of domination and control. Understanding this history is essential for recognizing and preventing similar patterns of systematic violence in our own time.